Welcome to the Whistleblower Newsroom. I'm Christina Borgeson. Right now, the national preoccupation is the COVID pandemic. But there's another issue that should be getting much more attention these days, and that's the militarization of space. Why? Because in the future, space wars could be far more disruptive or cause far more devastation here on Earth than the usual planetary conflicts. My guest, German investigative reporter Dirk Pohlmann, has been covering aviation and the militarization of space for some time now, and he's here to talk about it. Welcome, Dirk.
Hi, Christina. Glad to be with you again.
Let's talk about the history first of the militarization of space. I guess that started with Sputnik, right, back in the 50s?
Yeah, we also had from both superpowers, there were plans to have kind of a military space station that was discovered in the beginning of the 2000s when I think a cleaning woman found some astronaut suits which looked quite military with rank insignia on it. And from there on, it was noticed that the United States, but also the Soviet Union, had plans to have a military station in orbit. The plans were shelved; they never were really became reality. But the idea was there from both sides.
In the 2000s.
No, that the space station, it was discovered by accident by this cleaning woman who found these the spacesuits in a closet, really. The idea is from the 60s, yeah, that they tried to do that, but it never materialized.
Oh my God. Okay, so.
But you can see this is always, I mean, the point is always you have a new technology, and then the thought is, can it be used militarily? Can it be used for strategic purposes? And of course, space is very interesting. I mean, it started with the spy flights, which were then transformed. Spy flights, you have the advantage with a plane that you can go where you want. With a satellite, it's always in orbit. But that's shifted from the U-2 and the SR-71 to the Corona satellites at that time. Yeah, so it was with the beginning of the U-2 was also the beginning of the possibility of satellite intelligence, surveillance, yeah, National Reconnaissance Office, and so on. So that is from the beginning. And I think we can say that there's a space strategy that was under the Bush government in 2006. That's when I first noticed that they were talking about, it's basically, you could say, gunboat policy in space, that America declared that they want to have the capability to deny access to anybody they don't want in space or they consider a threat. And really anybody who has satellites in space can be a threat like that. And then you also have this change, the strange case of China, which was banned from taking part in the ISS space station in 2011. That was in connection. That was in connection, really, two things. It was a spy scandal at I think Lawrence Livermore Laboratories, at least at a nuclear research center. And then there was something in your parliament where they decided they couldn't have that, and that other was intellectual property, that they considered that the Chinese would steal intellectual property if they had access to the space station. And that was the idea. Basically, China steals everything, so we don't let them have it. And that is the official version, I would also say, because China is now, it does everything in space. It has space stations, it has astronauts, it has satellites, it's talking about, it put rovers on the moon, they want to go to Mars, they are talking about landing on the moon, so they are really the competitors to the United States in terms of spacefarer. It's not really Russia. Yeah, Russia is on a lower level. They can do their stuff pretty well, but China is really much more eager to get into space and to do something there. And nowadays, it's also about mining. It's about asteroid mining. So it's like putting a claim on space.
Are they already mining?
No. They're not already, but the possibility is out there now. For example, asteroids are quite interesting in terms of the elements that you can get there. So that is, It's on the horizon. And now they, to put it bluntly, it is like the United States has space as ours. There was even a quote that space is now the 51st state of the of the United States. That's what
that just sounds crazy to me. I mean, space is we don't even know how big space is. It's infinite, it seems, or whatever. I mean, how can the United States? That sounds crazy.
It is, yeah, you could say. I mean, that's why I say gunboat policy. It's really the ideas of the 19th century. Like, it's kind of a imperialist rebooting of the whole thing. So that is saying that if that's even in these laws and in the strategy that was published, that they say they want to dominate. So the possibility is there we dominate on land, on sea, and in the air, and they also want to dominate space. Yeah, and it's a little bit Magnomalia, of course, and you could say you could compare it in a way to, let's say, Antarctica, where there were treaties and say, you could imagine, I would imagine in the future of mankind, we would think about how to do things cooperatively in cooperation. And that's really what space in a way was about in the 70s. You remember after Apollo, and then there was this shake hands in space. So the attitude at the detente situation in the 70s after the landing on the moon, which was of course an idea from Kennedy. And I think Kennedy wanted to have that in the way that that it is an outlook to the future. And you could also talk about science fiction movies. For example, there's a famous East German and Polish science fiction movie, probably not famous in the United States, but at least for East Germans, it was a state-of-the-art movie after a novel from Stanislav Lem, one of the greatest science fiction writers and maybe writers anyhow, which was a lot about cooperation. It was an emergency call from planet Venus, and there was a rocket sent to Venus to look what's going on there, and the crew was international. There was there was a guy, a mathematician from India, and a lady from Japan. There was a Russian and an American together on the spaceship in this Eastern Bloc science fiction. So you could see the idea at that time was cooperation. We do this together. That's a new endeavor, and we leave behind the problems that we have on Earth, and space is the possibility of a tabula rasa, where it can start completely fresh. But what we have now is it's part of the power game. So it's
become it used to be the great game for oil, the big energy thing, and now it's the great game for space.
I think so. I think so, exactly. I think that is very much comparable. And it's, the mindset, if you go with a mindset of superiority and of capitalism to space, then you think, I want to do the mining, it's my claim, and I want to have my gunboats out there. It's not at all like Star Trek. I mean, Star Trek is a very different vision again. It's a very humanistic vision. It is.
Well, first, before I make the comment that I'm thinking of making, it's interesting how you had Bush, reestablishing the gunboat policy. We assert our right to defend ourselves in space, blah, blah, blah. And then along comes Trump, and he asserts, because, he's a commercial guy, he's a, real estate guy. He writes an executive order asserting U.S. property rights in outer space. I mean, how do you do that? How do you do that? I mean, I guess you can do it if you can back it up. But basically he said, encouraging international support for the recovery and use of space resources, throwing aside decades of international negotiations, he declared that the United States does not view space as a global commons, and that successful long-term exploration will require partnership with commercial entities to recover and use resources. And these will require, quote, the right to commercial recovery. So
Yeah.
I find this interesting because now you have Bezos, now you have, instead of nations in space, you have individuals, Musk and Bezos who are in space. Now, what does that do to the equation?
That's a very good and important question, because you might have noticed that there just has been the problem that Musk has sent something like 400 satellites to space. I noticed, I got a call from a colleague who told me, she's quite young, 30 years, and she said, I'm looking at the sky, and what is this? Is this UFOs or what? Yeah, she saw the lights crossing over, because it's a huge amount of satellites now, and these satellites are up there. And there has been a complaint by China, who have their space station out there in orbit. And the satellites, there were two complaints. One complaint was for a satellite that originally had been on an orbit of about 500 kilometers. And it was lowered at a certain angle, so that the angle and the height gives you a position, a location in space. And it was lowered from 500 to 382 kilometers. 390 is where the Chinese space station is floating around. So the Chinese, to avoid it was a near miss, what you would call in aviation a near miss. So to avoid that, the Chinese moved their space station.
So a near miss with one of Musk's Starlink satellites?
Yes.
Wow.
That's what you would call that. And as I said, and it's in air traffic control, that's what you would call a near miss. The question is, why did they lower the satellite to getting so close to the Chinese space station? What is that about? As far I cannot read the Chinese social media, but I read that there was a furor in China about this, and they considered it kind of space terrorism. Yeah, so that you do something. There was a second occasion where also a satellite from this Musk satellites was, going in a erratic altitude movement, so that they couldn't predict even where it was going. They again had to move the Chinese space station so there would not be the possibility of collision. It is not really that somebody was aiming it at it, but it was giving a threat. And now is exactly the question that you mentioned. It's a private entity. So all the treaties and all the thoughts that we had up to now is between space being used by states. And there's also the question of the militarization of space. With Trump, you had both. You had the Space Command was erected, so to get with the military in space. And like you mentioned, these, the commercialization of space. And you could talk about that, how to do that. But obviously, America has the idea to lead it and, as I said, deny access to anybody else they don't want. And that would be mainly Russia and China. There's also, India is into space. Israel tried to bring something to the moon, which did not work. So they're also into that. And there are a lot of other entities that will come.
The Iranians have launched a satellite, didn't they? In April 2021, they launched a satellite, a military satellite.
It's also, I think, good that you remind me. I think one of the points was that with the 2011, why the Chinese were not allowed on the ISS was also that it was declared that they would try to militarize space and use satellites as anti-satellite weapons. That was an accusation, yeah. But it's in psychology you would call that a projection. That's exactly what the Americans.
I'm thinking that's what the Americans are going to do.
Yes.
Well, does also the French established a space command in 2019.
Yes, I think it's awful. I always think in terms of what do I leave to my children and grandchildren, and this is not what I want. And even if you for a short moment would consider an extraplanetary attitude, what would you think if you you were kind of a Star Trek alien civilization and see how this.
That's an interesting thing, because we were having a discussion about this and about that show on History Channel that is what's it called again, with that guy Elizondo, who talking about they were talking about alien encounters, military people talking about alien encounters. And of course, a group of them went to, they complained to Congress that the United States had no policy for dealing with these UFOs that they were running into. And so immediately, of course, the militarization, we have to have we've got to defend ourselves against these people. Now, in all the years that people have been seeing UFOs and, UFO, whatever, I've never heard ever of a report of a UFO attacking anybody. I mean, I guess some people talk about being abducted, but I don't know. I've never heard of anybody being, killed by a UFO, so I'm wondering, I find it, and so Elizondo, I mean, because the whole rationale now for militarization of space seems to be, the more and more of these things, we're seeing more and more of these things, and we feel threatened.
It is, in a way, I think, completely ridiculous. Because if you think, as you said, if we, depending where you want to start, if you start 1947, like it's usually done, which I think is wrong, because we have descriptions of something that we would call today UFOs, which go back hundreds of years. Yeah, there's things there, and there are even paintings and so on. So that is questionable. But even if you started with 1947, as most of the books that I've seen on that would do, then if there would have been the idea, if there is an extraterrestrial intelligence and civilization, if they are interested in us, which they pretty much would be, we would be too. That's the way that we would be handle it. We would be interested. We sent satellites out, and not satellites, but rather spacecraft out in space with messages in case somebody picks it up. So this is the way we approach that. And so if there was anything out there, then what kind of technological advantage is there? If they wanted to mine on Earth, if they try to use our water, if they would treat us as cattle or whatever, and whatever thought you have, they could have done it in 70 years. And what the heck could we have done about it?
Right.
That is, I mean, you have these movies like Independence Day, but that is ridiculous. If you have a technology like that and you come with your F-50 and shoot I mean, it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And had it been a problem, then we would have noticed by now. So it's, again, I think it's a projection of the superpower thinking to space. That's what we have. And they always think in these terms of I want to have, let's say, the biggest possibility to use it, and I want to deny access to anybody else. And on the other hand, if you look at it, I think it's comparable. There are these tribes on the Andaman Islands. If a helicopter comes, they shoot with bow and arrow at them. If somebody comes at the beach, they will kill him. So we are kind of Komodo lizards in space, and would be considered, would you like to get in contact with us? And if you see what's going on planet Earth, and seeing that nuclear weapons have been used against our own entity,
very
own race.
Violent, very violent,
very violent, very dangerous. I would put a mark at them, planet Earth, and say, beware, Komodo lizards, come back in 5,000 years and see if they're still there. Maybe they're more rational. So in terms, even in that, I'm thinking, if we have these amount of interesting questions that arise from the fact that there is something that is acknowledged, meanwhile, that there is something we cannot explain. And then my rationale would be, we should make sure that our attitude is in a way that some other civilization would be interested in getting in contact with us. But I think we just do the opposite. All this,
Well,
what you see.
We were talking about Elizondo and that show, which was all about encounters with UFOs and so on, and the concern going to Congress and so on and so forth. And somebody I know, I can't say this person's name, but who knows, was saying that this is part of a propaganda campaign to generate fear and panic to gain more budget for the militarization of space, to justify more budget for the militarization of space. So it's like the story continues again,
Again, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what you mentioned. Is I tried to take it from the outside perspective. That is something that I talk with my colleague, where we try to report on these things on a rational, scientific, let's say philosophical level. And I would like to see a conference where people from all strands of science, which would be astrophysicists like Avi Loeb is a very, very interesting guy, very open guy, and you have maybe people from philosophy, from communications, from linguistic sorts, from biology. Astrobiology is a reasonable field meanwhile, so that to come to the idea what would be the preconditions for us, how should we handle this? And instead of that, is this handled by people going for a military budget? And I think from what I know, I would say that Lou Elizondo, I was very suspicious in the beginning, but I think he's a straightforward, honest guy.
Well,
that's at least my impression.
I think he's a good guy.
Yeah.
Under pressure. That's what I would say.
I would say for me, he's, I would call that, I don't mean that ironic, good American. So he thinks that the public should know about, that we should investigate that. But this whole thing is managed by people who look at it from a military perspective. And then he is under, he's under classification and so on. So he can't tell everything he knows. But it is now, meanwhile, and then you can see that all these senators always listen to that, and they always say, we have to know if this is Russian or Chinese. Definitely not. Yeah, they don't have anti-gravity devices which can go through other dimensions and so on. What you would have to think about what it could be if you look at it. I mean, all the movements, I think scientifically, it should be something that should be handled by scientific community. The scientific community is also tainted now by commercial interests, by national interest, always has been, but we should try to liberate science into a level that is really for the human race, that the science is working.
Yeah, and this is an area of science, and this is an area of inquiry that is always wrapped in ridicule. Okay, we want to militarize space, but you believe in aliens?
Yeah.
So what are we doing? We're militarizing space so we can better fight each other here on Earth. I mean, we have the Chinese hypersonic missile, right?
Yeah. And Russian. The Russians are very strong in hypersonic. You could say they are more advanced, meanwhile, than the American side with that. So, sort of the military power of Russia. It's an astonishing switch. When I grew up, 70s, 80s, it was that Russia had enormous amounts of planes and tanks and submarines and ships, and they were not high quality. And the Americans were able to produce with computer technology the advanced weapons, where the Soviets could not really compete in the field of high tech. And Russia was big money spending, corruption, and so on. Yeah, and now it switched around. Russia is with the amount they pay less for the military than the United States pays for their intelligence apparatus. And they're able to come up with new inventions all the time. And they're very advanced, very effective. It's like it switched around. And now America, which has this huge 700 billion.
I mean, it's completely bloated. And their procurement and development processes are so burdensome. So burdensome. They take forever. I mean, these my son who was in Afghanistan, he said like these guys, these Afghans, their warlord would give them, a bunch of money and say, go build these drones. And they were building these, they were building this stuff, these things. Like, first of all, they were under threat of death if they didn't deliver, if they stole the money and didn't deliver, and they had to deliver toot sweet, and that's what it. But in the American development system and procurement system, it's just crazy. Again, it's caught up in the, we got to make money here, we got to make money there, we got to, so that everything, let's drag this out, let's make this more expensive than it has to be, and so on. And it's just a mess. But to get back to space and the militarization of space, obviously those are huge commercial possibilities for the usual suspects.
Yes.
Okay. So
and you have this tendency that you see the whole thing is oligarchic. It's in space again. So where I wanted to get at was that now Trump made a business enterprise out of that, and you have now Bezos, and you have Elon Musk doing that, and now but the situation that I described with China is that there's a new entity, which are private entities, and they're in this field where formerly only states have been. And this is kind of a military operation. And you have to think about it also that probably some people in the American intelligence services now think about how they could use this advantage of these private companies, that are in there, which are kind of out of the boundaries that we had before, how to use that strategically, militarily, in terms of the space command. You have kind of that's a new entity. So how can you use it? And they think about it in that term. And if we talk about how ridiculous, I mean, it was ridiculed for a long time, this discussion about other intelligence, other civilizations. I mean, it's as a scientific question, I think it's somewhere there's something. There's the Fermi paradox. Where are they, if they are there? But you would have to think in terms, as a rational being, you have to think in terms of the possibility. And that's always what intelligence services do. And when it started, they were and are very interested in what it is. They just can't grasp it. They just cannot understand. Nobody can understand. So and then they decided if it could be important, so nobody should know about it. Nobody should accept us.
I have my suspicions. I'm going to tell you about an experience I had, and I didn't know what to make of it until I saw this guy years later on TV. When I was working at CNN back in, let me see, I guess it was maybe 15 years ago, and I was doing this film. I did this film called for ABC Entertainment. I was working on this film. I didn't do the film I was working on. I was a producer, segment producer, called Sex with Cindy Crawford. And I met this love doctor, this woman. She was a Mexican woman, really wonderful person. We became friends. And one day after that was over, and actually that was for ABC, and then I got a job at CNN. And then she called me when we became friends. She called me one day and she goes, Christina, I want you to come over here and meet someone. And I come there, and there's this guy, and he tells me his name is David Adair. Mm-hmm. And he's a rocket scientist. I mean, this was like a rocket genius from, 7 years old or something. And, these really smart geniuses, the government trolls for them as they're growing up, and he was sucked into the system. And he told me that he worked on, he did some work on reverse engineering alien craft, that you put your hands in these two things, and that's how you maneuvered the craft, or whatever. He told me this whole story, and he was very paranoid, didn't want and I was like, this is a little weird. And plus, I'm with CNN. What am I going to do with this? I mean,
Exactly.
I don't know. But I went home and I looked him up and I thought, well, this guy is not a nut, that's for sure. And so, I just let it be, because doing UFOs is not a career move you want to make in the mainstream. So I was like, oh, okay. So, and then literally, I think it was last year, a couple of years ago, I saw him on the Gaia channel, which is a channel that is for spiritual stuff. Yeah. Okay. And there's David Adair, and there's a string of other military guys talking about dealing with, extraterrestrials. And I'm thinking to myself, and these are people, I mean, they have military backgrounds and they give their military, and I'm thinking to myself, what's going on here? What's going on? Why is it these people, they're on Gaia saying this stuff, and they're talking about federations and this and that, and I'm thinking to myself, this has got to be either the biggest mind, what I could ever be watching, or this is real, because these people, I mean, after all, they have reputations, they have long backgrounds in the military, and they have secret clearances and so on. So what's going on? And now we're talking about militarizing. How are you going to militarize? I mean, we are gnats, allegedly, compared to anybody who could make it to Earth is obviously way more sophisticated than anybody on Earth, because Earth hasn't been able to make it anywhere but, people, but to the moon,
Yeah.
So what's going on? What experiences have you had in this? There's this weird divide here, these people with major credentials talking about aliens, and then over here in this sphere, it's all BS and it's all make believe, and yet we have this weaponization of space.
I came to this whole topic from my investigations of intelligence services, because the weird thing was, I have to tell you, when I came out of university, I was very much convinced, and that is typically German, I would say, people who consider themselves educated in Germany had the belief, the strong belief, that it's all bullshit. Okay. It was nothing you could discuss at all. It was weird. So that was my stance. And I talked to a guy from who had been a cameraman for the United States Air Force. I became friend of him. He was the oldest guy in the company. I was the youngest guy. And we both had a very high interest in aviation. So I discussed it with him, and he asked me about what I thought of UFOs. And I said, my argument was, it's very difficult to prove something negative, which means that to prove that something does not exist. If you say, I met Mickey Mouse, how do you prove that it didn't happen? Yeah, so this was my argument, and he got angry with me. And he really got, I mean, we were friends, and he was the older guy who took care of this interesting young person from Germany. But he started to shout at me and yell and said, you're just another one of these arrogant academic idiots, and you don't know anything BS about what is really going on. And then I was astonished. I was so astonished about his reaction that I thought, why did he do that? And so I thought it was because he knew more. And I tried to get something out, and he said several of the things he could not talk, but he could tell me that there's much more to it than I would ever imagine, that he talked to people chasing things with planes and so on. So that is how I got interested in it. And then you could see that, of course, I mean, that's simple logic. For an intelligence service, if you have something like that, then you would say, the possibility that this is real is very small, but there is a possibility, and we need to know. We need to know if there is something to it, because if it was real, the importance of that would be so big that would be a game changer in everything. For example, if you get to know how to, we cannot travel to other planets. We have our limitations, which is speed and speed of light and whatever, but if you talk about several other dimensions, which physicists do, then there might be other possibilities. There have been descriptions already how that is done with a retrieved spacecraft from alien civilizations. And you get into that, and then you are in a wilderness of mirrors. Because if you go at it rationally, it's very hard to see, also from intelligence service, that they use everything as deception methodology. Yeah, that
methodologically,
that they use it to have smoke and mirrors around them, so they could do something behind these smoke and mirrors. You can have a real, that was, for example, in Area 51, when you had this F-117, which was doing its test flight there, and it looked like an arrowhead. And people described it as an arrowhead, that it was an accurate description, but you didn't want anybody else to know that you were trying, with the angular surfaces for stealth technology. So you declared it a UFO and made bullshit of it. And people see flying arrowheads, maybe they took too much of peyote or what else, yeah? So it's this is in the game of intelligence, it's both. And then I saw, from the files, you can go to the FBI or CIA files, and then you can see that there were people from the very beginning who said there's a chance of this extraterrestrial hypothesis. And you are left out in the wilderness. And what you described, my colleague and me, we talk to scientists quite often. And only in the last year, for the first time, some people were willing to acknowledge that they are thinking about the possibility, which every scientist should do by profession. But they were it was, as you said, it's not a boost for your career. If you're a scientist, it could be the very end of your career. In the beginning, you start to think about it. That's not how science should work, but it was for them, it was kind of plutonium. You touch it and that's it. You're radioactive and you will never be let into a laboratory as a biochemist or so. And then it started with astrobiology, which became really interesting because we noticed that, for example, I did a documentary on that we have on planet Earth, we have several bacteria that would not survive on Mars, but they would, hey, it would be party time. They live not on the ground, but in the soil. So we know that there's the possibility. So it gained, but the whole thing was, again, for a long time, and I think this really is Luis Elizondo who changed that with this strategy of also going into the media, and by using the media as a tool to enforce the topic on politics and take it out from the realm of intelligence and military and secret operations. And they now outsource this very much to private companies.
But Lou Elizondo could not have done that series 5 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, whatever. Something has changed. There's a limited hangout of information being put out there. And again, part of it is because they want money to develop the Space Force. And this is a good way to get yes, these are threatening. It's not what it is almost to me. Okay, my reptilian brain says, it's kind of a look here, not there, because it's the aliens, but actually we want to militarize space so we can get the Chinese and Russians, more easily.
Exactly. That's same. And it's very sad because I think Lou Elizondo is honestly interested in getting to that we should get further on the track. I had interviewed people from Foreign Technology Division who were responsible, for example, for Project Blue Book. And it was very different. I talked to 3 guys and they had very different take on that. One would say it's all bullshit and I don't believe it. In my recommendation, he said that every American president coming in wanted to know from them what they knew. And they said, we don't know very much. We have a small percentage of things that we cannot explain. And we think we tried to find out, we tried to get to the bottom of it, but we couldn't. And we recommend that you don't spend any money on it because it will lead nowhere. It's no threat, so forget about it.
Yeah, but what about Corso? What was he? I can't remember what was his rank. Was he a general?
Colonel.
Colonel. He was Colonel. Corso. He wrote that
but
book.
He was the intelligence liaison for Eisenhower. So he was, he was not He was a very interesting guy. And then that's exactly at the end of his life, he comes up and tells these weird stories about re-engineering and retrieved craft. And then you think shortly before you die, you go out in the public and tell bullshit to anybody because you just want to ridicule yourself and fool everybody else. So what would be the motivation to do that at the end of your life? Very strange, very strange. Yeah, that is, and he's not the only one. So you see that.
I'm telling you, you go on that Gaia channel, and there's a series, and this guy, I can't remember his name right now, who interviews these military folks about dealing with the aliens, and I'm sitting there listening, and I'm like, because this guy also, the interviewer, he was, I can't remember if he was a biotech guy or something, or bio, but he dealt with I think pieces of alien, either bodies or craft, I can't remember which, but anyway, this guy was, he's part of this group of people talking about having encounters on a scientific and collaborative basis, whatever. And I just sit there and I listen, and I'm thinking, this is so strange, because outside of this Gaia channel, it's like a parallel universe where this is all BS. So
yes.
I mean, it's kind of meant to be that way. I think that kind of confusion, create that kind of confusion or whatever. But I don't know what is, because I would also think that if you're setting up a space force, militarizing space, you'd also be looking this way too, towards, well, we're militarizing ourselves up here. Is anything going to come at us from out there?
At least I would be happy to know that somebody thinks in that way, because you start to go with military. I mean, that's why I said I would like to have that conference, for example, and you're always limited to your own history and thoughts. I mean, that's how they did it in the beginning. They were arguing, look what happened to the American cultures, native cultures when Columbus came. It was, so their argument was, if there would be coming a different civilization, we would be the native Indians and they would be Columbus and we would collapse. So be careful about that. This is nothing easy to deal with.
Basically, that's a confirmation that we, are the brutal, evil ones. We came, the white folks, we came to these lands and we exterminated these people. And so the projection is, if we did it, that's what they're going to do to us. Exactly.
Wow. If you look what Columbus came, and there's a famous quote, I recommend Howard Zinn, great history book. But if you look at that, then he came and he said, we have made encounter with these natives and they're very friendly and they come with presents. And they're very peaceful, and it would be great because we can make great slaves out of them. There would be no resistance, and we can just abuse them. That was the mindset.
We can make great slaves of them. Is that what he said?
Yes, that was the beginning. He was thinking in terms of that they could use it. It was not we encountered, but it was simply how could we make slaves of them. That was the mindset, and that is, as I said, cannon boat policy. It's the same thing. So but if you talking about getting weapons into space, you should at least think about the possibility that this is a limit which you transgress, where you could be interesting if there are other civilizations where you become interesting. Yeah. So we should consider. This is why I think a conference like that would be reasonable. And then my point would be, from our perspective, that would be, I think, from the human logic and philosophy and law, it would be, as soon as you go into space, is you make that step and then come with weapons, then you are no longer limited. It's not anymore that you can do what you want, but if you get into possibility to disturb the order of the area around, then you are a legal entity of space community, so to speak. You are something, and I think the same in a way you could argue with nuclear power. You know, one of the strange things is that if you look into UFO sightings, you will notice that a lot of the sightings are connected to nuclear energy, that they are nuclear rockets, that they are nuclear power plants. And that makes, on the one hand, you could have a very simple explanation because everything nuclear is security and it's well guarded and well watched. So it could be a higher probability that if there's something around it, you find it. But on the other hand, also, you could say, you know, if you think about something, what would you look for? If you look for a civilization in space, that would be a good, you know, if you're able to deal technically with nuclear power, you have a certain level, which is interesting. And so it would be like, okay, that's an indication. And then we talk about 1947, we talk about Roswell. That was the part where the first nuclear bomber squadron or wing of the US Air Force was stationed. So it was the connection of nuclear power, and then you look at it and then you see probably it has been used. So that makes a lot of sense that it's connected, that you're interested in that. But then again, as you said, I think it's very sad because you can see as soon as we're able to, I always say we, but it's the first thing is that it's about power, who has power, and the other thing is about communication. As long as the topic of UFOs is something for the X-Files, a very intelligent series, or it's on the tabloid side, but it doesn't transgress into university level or into a parliament. And that's only recently that it happened. As long as it's something that is discussed in certain circles, which are not really part of the, let's say, intellectual establishment, or it's only for some weirdos who do that as a hobby, intellectuals who like to think about everything, then it is, but this has changed. It has transgressed from the fringes of the communication society into parliament, into the center. There's Avi Loeb, which I consider a great guy in terms of scientific interest. Now suddenly it's a topic where scientists work on it. And even Germany.
Who's Avi Loeb?
He's an astrophysicist from Harvard, and he's
Harvard? From Harvard?
Yeah. So he's one of the top guys in science, in astrophysicists, and he started to first he said, you know, there was this thing Oumuamua, which came across our galaxy.
That cigar-shaped thing, that big long thing. Yeah.
It's probably not cigar-shaped, but it's probably pancake.
Well, it was long. Yeah, it was long and flat.
It was depicted like a cigar. It looked like a badly made cigar. That's what they depicted it. But what we don't have very much, and this is what Avi Loeb was saying. It was what we know is that it had a higher reflectivity than usually rocks would have. It was probably pancake shaped, and it sped up, it accelerated while going through our universe. And that is how. And then his argument was, if we take everything that we have, which is not very much together, then we should come to the possibility to think about that this is kind of a Voyager thing that is sent by somebody else passing by us to have a look at us. And it could be, you know, could be something like a drone. So Avi Loeb said, this is really a valid hypothesis, maybe the most valid hypothesis that we can have according to the data, but we don't have enough data. So we should start to look out for things like that. Because if there is something else, it would probably send like Voyager spacecraft across, and we should know more about it next time something comes, that we have a better look at it with telescopes in the space, for example, that it's simply like a good scientific method to, if we want to know more about it, we have to think about it. And I think that's exactly, for me, it was a big relief, because I thought, we're great. This is the scientific mindset. And finally, it's possible to say something like that. I think anybody who's a real scientist thinks this is maybe the most interesting question of all. Not are we alone? We are probably not, but do we have contact? Is it possible to have contact? And what does it mean for us if there's this possibility? And it was all, you know, it's so sad that it is on this military level, that it's only, it's like reptile brain level.
It makes sense in this sense, is that for the military, first and complete access to any higher technology that is not already available on the earth is what they're doing. That's why you have all this poo-pooing of aliens and this and that and the other, and keeping everything under wraps and so on, is because that technology is what gives you the edge in terms of the power that you wield on this planet, you know. And right now, for example, again, on this Gaia channel, you hear these guys talking about types of energy, cold fusion energy, and there's a gravitational energy, I forget what it's called, where they already know about it. But of course, the oil is the life, is the energy that, they have right now. They have the grip on the planet, and any kind of clean, free, cheap, whatever energy is not welcome until the last drop of oil has been spent, and of course we're talking about other technology too, hyper nano technology. I don't know. I mean, I don't know those technologies. If they've been culled from crashed vehicles or other contacts or whatever, you and I don't know about it.
This is I think an important thought is, if you have Gaia channel, then you can discuss anything there. You can discuss my girlfriend or my daughter was abducted by an alien and I don't know where she is. That would be possible, but not in Harvard. Yeah. So
of course not, because those are the mainstream. Those are the thought. What do you call it? They're like they're in control of what you think and what is right,
what is possible to talk, what is
possible. Yeah,
exactly. And then on the other hand, you have to be aware that it really is possible to say anything on Gaia. So how do you check what is valid or not?
Exactly.
And then you are in that what you told about, you listen to that, and then you say, well, that's a big thing that you're talking about. And there's this rule from Carl Sagan, which is very good, which says, big arguments need big proof and not small proof. So that is very reasonable. But then again, I say this is what science and intellectual thinking is about. And there was also like DARPA, they had a conference on this question, and they said, if somebody is thinking about it, it should be us. We should be the ones to think ahead. So if something is there that there's already something, let's say, in the drawer that you can take out, and that you don't start from zero. And that is exactly intelligence type of thinking. So I think, but my idea was, what I came to, my first conclusion about 15 years ago when I started to think about it, was that this was taken into the realm of national security and intelligence services, which means only a very few people should know what it is about. The rest is kept in the dark and fed with bullshit. And that's the way it should be. And it should have been in the realm of science, where it means that you can discuss anything. You have to get proof, and it's discussed by the knowledgeable people who have a capability to understand it. And the rule there is complete openness. You have to everything can be discussed, but anything has to be proven.
If you think that'll ever happen, you're dreaming in color.
I hope. I think, in a way, it's very hard to. You could also look at the whole thing in a way, again, if you think about in terms of communication. If you think about my friend, my American cameraman friend, who was talking about that they were part of a crew that was, he said, for example, he said this whole thing with a Santilli film is a fake because we would have been the ones to film that.
What's because the Santilli film?
It is an alien alleged, it's a fake. An alleged, they took an alien apart.
Alien autopsy, that alien autopsy.
Yeah. So don't believe it. And he, for several reasons, he gave good reasons why this is nonsense. But again, if you have these things, it's as I said, the point is, what can you believe? What can you believe? What can you talk about? and these things are very, very weird. And the big thing now for me is that it crossed over into the realm of, for example, this top-notch guy, Avi Loeb, who's discussing that and saying we should be interested in it. We should have.
For now, what we're interested in is
And then I think we have to advance. And I think one of the things that I think is important is that we talk about these things, and that we have kind of utopian visions of what it should be, because the only utopian visions we have right now are those of the oligarchs from the World Monetary Fund.
Yeah, but it's their utopia.
Klaus Schwab.
Their utopia is our sort of control and enslavement. Yeah. And I mean, again, space is for militarizing space is so that you can control the resources and enrich a few people, and the rest of us can go to hell. And it's, as they say in French, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. The more things change, the more they stay the same. We've come to the end of our hour. This has been fascinating. We got to talk about this.
But I want to get back to that. What you just described, that you said that I think this is exactly the point. They govern everything. They govern now land, sea, air. Now they govern space, and they also govern our vision of the future. It shouldn't be that way. It should, like science fiction had been when I was a young kid, or from my family, a lot of people read that, and that was about how could it be, how should it be. It's a mix of science and fiction.
Our next conversation will be, how do you make it the way that you think it should be?
Now, okay. Not me. All of us. We should do that together. We should be in this together. Okay.
We are in this together. Thank you, Dirk. Thank you so much.